We're moving right along with our civil rights unit, and today's class had to do with Hispanic civil rights. And before we get into the material that's in our book, I want to give you a few historical antecedents to put it in a broader construct before we move forward. And some of you I had in history class, others of you had a different history teacher. Don't want to be presumptuous to what you know and don't know. But I want to remind you of the Mesoamerican people, the Aztec of Mexico and the Maya of Central America and the Inca of South America, highly advanced, highly civilized until the European arrival really changed that. And then if you look at U.S. history, this entire part of the country used to be Mexico. Okay, so here's a world history perspective, a U.S. history perspective, but Hispanic people have been part of the historical story for a very, very long time. And going back to American history, if you look at St. Augustine, Florida, St. Augustine, Florida is the oldest inhabited American city. So we have this Hispanic flavor all the way back to 1565. And in terms of the political side of things, Joseph Hernandez was the first Hispanic member of Congress in 1822, over 200 years ago. So my point in saying this, it's a long-running story. Oftentimes people see the civil rights movement as a window of time in the 20th century, but again, these historical antecedents have a bearing on those stories that happened in the 20th century. 1846, another U.S. history event I hope you remember from your freshman year. That's a reiteration of what I told you a minute ago. The American Army took the Southwest of America. And if you ever traveled in the Southwest, you'll see a lot of towns with Spanish names and a lot of, restaurants and that sort of thing. So the culture is very much still there in the Southwest. Okay, so here's the material from your book, the classic civil rights side of things. So the United Farm Workers. Now, this movement broke out in the 1940s and 50s. And what this was a group of farm workers in solidarity to get together and demand better treatment because their treatment was quite poor. So there was a real dire need for people to get together and demand more rights. So here's a picture of the conditions people were working in. And most employers continue to use Mexican workers because they could pay them a very low wage, make them work long hours without a break, and mistreat them. They were also denied the ability to become citizens. It was a very, very unpleasant situation for these people, and they needed some leadership. And here is the leadership. So Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta joined their two organizations to create this united farm workers. Now, the goal was to unionize for better wages, working conditions, benefits, and you could even go farther just to say some basic human dignity that a lot of these people did not receive. And when we learned about the other civil rights movements, a lot of those leaders are well known, whereas these two are lesser known for whatever odd reason. But now you know. So we can do a little bit better with that. And here's a poster from the time, Viva Cesar, Viva Dolores. And you can see, I like this quote. This is really beautiful quote. Cesar's life is the lucero, the light that provides vision to our path with the glow of energy generated by the struggle. And Chavez described Huerta's character as totally fearless, both mentally and physically. And I think there's some truth in both. Two very exceptional people in history. Now, the movement itself focused on three main points: the farm workers, educational rights, and voting and political rights. So let's start with the farm workers, okay? Now, these farm workers, they staged peaceful protests and boycotts. They organized workers, which forced the employers to meet their demand, especially in the agricultural field. If there is something that needs to be harvested, there's a short window. And if you don't get that food harvested, you lose everything. So they had a little bit of clout in those times, and they were aware of that. And Filipinos also joined the workers. So these were the methods. These were nonviolent methods, and here's a picture of what is going on. And these are people, taking advantage of their First Amendment rights and peaceably protesting and all that good stuff. Okay, so these were I put were and are because you can make an argument this movement is still going. So this is what people were looking for: specific hours and pay. And again, just the psychology of it, knowing when you go into work, when you leave work. Toilets and water in field. Okay, you get what I said a second ago about basic human dignity? A pension after retirement, protective gear against pesticides, and amnesty for workers brought illegally. And this is a little factoid, and I know some of the FRQ questions have these sorts of things, but you can see still today legal struggles, these struggles of what people are going through, the overall pay. So in class, we looked at this in more detail. If you want to pause the video and check that out, not a bad thing to do. And the second area they were looking at was improving education. Now, Hispanic students were often placed in segregated schools, and there was unfair practices against Hispanic students, and college and university students worked with African Americans to establish rights for both. So if you look at this picture here, and if you change these children to all African American children, it would look very much like Jim Crow America. And you could make an argument very similar ordeal to what the African American community went through. Now, in terms of educational improvements, what they were looking, or what happened was number one, they had an introduction of bilingual education in public schools. And to this day, I've been teaching a long time, the book manufacturers will send me Spanish language materials in addition to the English materials, and that's been going on my whole career. Now, the integration of Hispanic students into white schools. Now, Brown versus Board stuck in your head, yeah, that's another part of that. Number three, outlawed manual labor as punishment. Yeah, I don't know if you need to be an expert in the Eighth Amendment to see that as being wrong to a child. And then introduction of Black and Hispanic histories on college campuses. And again, history is important because it explains why things are how they are. It gives you a deeper understanding. So if you can never learn of your own history, you don't get that deeper understanding of your own people. Now, obviously, that's important. Now, in terms of voting and political rights, Hispanic Americans were often segregated and persecuted as African Americans had been. Now, La Raza Unida political party, this movement fought for the rights of Hispanic Americans. Okay, and 1975, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is extended to Hispanics. Okay, now this is after I was born. This is not ancient history. Again, then number four, the case of University of California versus Bakke. Universities could not use affirmative action to limit Hispanics in universities. So, in a sense, if you look at the movement, and here's another picture of what was going on, I'm actually going to backpedal to the three big things. I think it's a safe argument to say they did have some success from farm workers getting some better treatment and some better pay and safety equipment, educational rights, the integration of schools, Spanish language, materials in terms of having their history being taught, and voting and political rights. Now, if I look at modern times, the Hispanic voting bloc is pivotal in America today. So it is growing and growing and growing, has been growing since this movement that started all the way back in the 1940s and the 50s with the United Farm Workers, and the movement continues on today. So I appreciate you watching.